Let me ask you about the Bill Maher program, because one thing that stood out to me, and it was pointed out by Chris Hayes on MSNBC earlier this week, is that it was a bunch of guys sitting around the table, none of whom actually are Muslim. Do you think that was a problem, that you all were discussing this topic without anyone there who could speak from their own personal experiences?
Well, no, it was, that was not, the purpose of the show was not to discuss Islam. We sort of stumbled into this. I think we knew it was on the agenda, but
I understand, but isn't this even more broadly in media a problem, the lack of representation when we're talking about these topics like religion?
The problem really is that people like Irshad and Majid Nawaz, who I mentioned, there are not enough of these people, and so if I'm mistaken about that, then they don't have enough of a voice, that even I'm in ignorance of their numbers. They are not represented in conversations like this enough.
I mean, Irshad, you must be pretty tired of being booked just to talk about extremism and not to talk about moderates, not to talk about reform.
Certainly, and I'm not surprised by that. I mean, bombings and beheadings are always sexier than good people doing and saying good things. But I want to get back to Sam's point that, there may be more reformist Muslims in the world than are being given airtime and ink time. I think you're right, Sam.
Irshad,
there are.
Can I just ask
there
you?
are. But let me just
tell
say,
me
Sam,
what percentage.
Tell
me what percentage of Muslims.
Allow me to finish my point.
I just want to know how many you think there are.
We don't know. We don't know. And one of the reasons we don't know is precisely that they're not given the platforms to, speak their minds. And this is why, Sam, I'm asking people like you, I'm sending you stories of Muslim reformists around the world and asking you to share them with your large constituency. This is how we're going to not just transcend our own differences, but actually create a common front to defeat the kind of extremism that you and I fervently oppose. This is what I don't understand. Good folks like you, and you are coming from an absolutely constructive place in my view. Good folks like you will say that you want to help empower Muslim reformists, but then will almost exclusively focus on the jihadis and the extremists when you're in front of a TV camera or a radio microphone. I don't understand why you consistently lapse into that mistake.
Reformists have to focus on the extremists and the jihadists and the Islamists as well. This is a common project.
But they're saying we're here and we're speaking. Why aren't you listening?
That's why I'm talking to you, Irshad, and that's why I'm not talking to Reza Aslan. I consider that this is a fundamental distinction. We need people who will honestly acknowledge the problem. And this is why I'm doing a book with Majid Nawaz, and this is why I'm giving money to his organization.
To your point, Sam, about these percentages, you said on the Bill Maher program that jihadists and Islamists make up arguably 20% of Muslims in the world. But I can't find the data for that. Where does that come from?
Well, that's quite conservative. And again,
but it's conservative based on what?
Well, Pew results, Gallup polls. There have been many polls done in Muslim countries, and if you look at these polls, you'll see that in many cases the most extreme countries have not allowed the polling to take place. So the data already skewed in favor of a more benign picture.
Well, that's a fair point, but the same Pew polls that you're citing also show things like this. Let me read one line from it. This is from 2013. In most countries where the survey asked Muslims about religious extremism, more than 75% say suicide bombing and other forms of violence against civilians is rarely or never justified. To me, that doesn't sound like the sort of violent Islam that I hear you describing.
Okay, well, you've cherry-picked one question, but just flip it around. So 25% say that it is sometimes or often justified. And when you look, that's averaged over a bunch of countries.
That's
if you look at specific countries, there are percentages that are much higher.
So then I guess we should be having a country-by-country discussion and not a discussion about Islam.
Well, no, but we can do that. But again, it's misleading to focus on countries, as many people want to do, and it's much more relevant to focus on doctrines and the total number of subscribers to each of these doctrines. So if you ask a question like, do you think apostates should be killed? Do you think someone should be killed for leaving the religion, whether joining another religion or becoming an atheist? That is, first of all, that is a mainstream doctrine within Islam. There is no school of Islam that says, oh no, apostasy is fine. Where did you ever get that idea? Every school of jurisprudence in the Muslim world will say that apostasy is a killing offense. Now, a reformist like Irshad has to figure out how to change that.
But Sam,
if you take this narrow question,
may I just add
vast numbers of Muslims believe this is a killing offense, and that's why Irshad's life is dangerous, and that's why the life of any Muslim atheist is dangerous, in the way that the life of a Christian atheist or a Jewish atheist isn't.
Irshad, do you feel that your life is dangerous?
Used to be. I don't feel that much anymore, in part because I think things have radically changed, and they have in the trenches since 9/11. Not for everybody, but I can tell you not long ago, I did a major debate on Al Jazeera in which I was debating a conservative Muslim. Sure, I received hate mail afterwards, but I got a lot more love bombs from a new generation of Muslims than I did hate mail, and not a single death threat. Am I therefore saying that everything is rosy? Not at all. And please do not misunderstand me there. What I am saying is that when you consistently focus on the problem without shining a light, Sam, on where the hope is coming from, then that in turn misleads the general public into believing that there simply is no hope. And so people lapse into despair and then become even more angry and even more fearful.
I think I will.
I'm happy to take your direction there, Irshad, and if you want to send me a blog roll that I should tweet about, I'm happy to do it. I think you're giving me more credit as a publisher of this kind of information than I deserve. But the other thing that you notice about my focus is a result of the fact that so few people are calling a spade on this issue. We have a president who says ISIS has nothing to do with Islam.
Right.
We have obscurantists like Glenn Greenwald and Reza Aslan taking up immense bandwidth.
Right.
And lying about the link between doctrine and behavior. And then academics and journalists everywhere simply don't believe that anyone ever believes in paradise. I think this is all propaganda. I think that they think jihadists are bluffing.
My point.
It's amazing to me that blowing yourself up is not convincing as a rhetorical device that you actually have the courage of your convictions.
Sam, I'm simply saying I agree with you 100% on that, and I'm simply saying that rather than allow yourself to be distracted by the propagandists, how about taking back your message and shining a spotlight on reformists over and over again, not just once, not just intermittently.
The conversation will keep going online and here on TV. Sam Harris and Irshad Manji, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'm being generous.
Right.
That comes to about 1 million people who are jihadists. So that still leaves us with 299 million missing Muslim terrorists.
Right. Well, there are a few distinctions I think we have to make here. One is there's a difference between a jihadist and an Islamist. And there I was talking about Islamists and jihadists together. And so Islamists are people who want to foist their interpretation of Islam on the rest of society. And sometimes they have a revolutionary bent, sometimes they have a more of a normal political bent. But they do want to...
The fact that somebody may believe that, for example, Sharia should obtain and women's testimony should be worth half a man's in court doesn't mean that they want to kill people. Right?
Well, no.
Those are being conservative and religious, which, by the way, is not my orientation at all, but it's different from wanting to kill people.
Yes, yeah. Well, we should, again, you have to parse this on specific points, like do you favor killing apostates? Do you think adulterers should be killed? And even among Islamists, you'd find more subscribing to one versus the other, depending on the poll you trust. But I didn't just pull the number out of a hat. I mean, there's a group at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that looked at 40 years of parliamentary elections in the Muslim world, literally every election that has occurred, and found that Islamists got 15% of the votes. So I would say that when you take this number 15% who vote for Islamist parties, and then you look at the poll results on specific implementation of Sharia law, so do you want adulterers and thieves given the traditional punishments, or should apostates be killed? You never find the number, with very few exceptions, you never find the number as low as 15% voting in favor of those punishments. It's often 60%, depending on the society. So I believe nudging that up to something around 20% is still a conservative estimate of the percentage of Muslims worldwide who have values relating to human rights and free speech that are really in zero-sum contest with our own. And I just think we have to speak honestly about that.
clearly Islam has a problem today, but there have been periods when Islam was at the vanguard of modernity. You know, it was the place that preserved Aristotle and preserved science. So if it was Islam that was the problem, how come it was okay then? In other words, that would suggest that it is the social and political conditions within Muslim societies, or you know, the people now. In other words, clearly Islam has been compatible with peace and progress, and it is compatible with violence, I would argue, just like all religions.
Yeah, well, up to a point. I would say that specific ideas have specific consequences. And the idea of jihad is not a new one. It's not an invention of the 20th century. And many people are now spreading a very PC and sanitized history of religious conflict. Islam has been spread by the sword for over 1,000 years. And yes, there's been an intensification, and for obvious political reasons, of intolerance in the 20th century. But the idea that life for Christians and Jews as dhimmi under Muslim rulers for 1,000 years was good doesn't make any sense. And certainly life for Jews, when you compare it to medieval Christendom, then, okay, it might.
But that was the main alternative. I mean, that's why when the Jews left Spain and were expelled, they went to the place that they thought was most hospitable to them, which was the Ottoman Empire, which was the Caliphate, right?
I criticize Christianity as much as anyone. I wrote a book, Letter to a Christian Nation, which is just a vilification of the history of Christianity, the influence of the beliefs in the modern world.
Having written that book, you would recognize that there are elements of Christianity that, as you point out in that book, are compatible with and celebrate slavery and violence and, you know, all these very, very backward attitudes. And yet there are times when Christianity represented that, and at times when it has represented peace and modernity.
Okay,
right?
But there's a few things we have to distinguish here. One is specific ideas have specific consequences. So when you ask why Jews aren't living out of Leviticus